Hello, conservationists. Welcome to Chapter 3, Species Diversity with Mrs. Fose. So this chapter is going on from Chapter 2, the Intro to Biodiversity. So we're going to look at specifically diversity in species. So the first thing that you should know is what is a species? And there are actually a few ideas of what makes different species. For example, there's the morphological species concept, which is if they look the same, they're the same species. The biological species concept is the one that we'll be using in general, and that says that you're the same species if you can interbreed together, have offspring, and those offspring can have offspring if they're fertile. So the example we have over here with a horse and a donkey breeding and making a mule, they're not the same species because that mule is sterile and can't breed. The biological species concept was brought up by Ernst Mayr, so there's a picture of him there. A really interesting example with dinosaurs. There's a great TED Talk on this as well. They thought these were 3 different dinosaur species, but what happened when they looked at the fossils is that they found that there was bone structure like a baby, an adolescent where you've just got growth plates, and then an adult. So that's pretty fun. So the biological species concept, where you're interbreeding, producing fertile offspring, works for us to tell species most of the time. And now that we can do genetic analysis, we can use that as well. 2 times it doesn't work. Asexual organisms. So, like coral, for example, reproduce by budding. And therefore, you can't tell if they're the same species of coral by them breeding, right? And then another example is fossils, because we don't know exactly how they bred together. But like the dinosaurs from the previous page, we can use those bones sometimes to look at them a bit. Okay, so you must be saying, it must be really hard to make a species. Well, let's look at the different ways we can keep species apart so they don't interbreed. You have 2 different types of barriers between species, pre-zygotic and post-zygotic. So pre means before, post means after, and a zygote is a fertilized egg. So basically you'll have barriers before the egg gets fertilized and barriers after. So we'll look at pre-zygotic first. Okay. So here you could have individuals in the same area at the same time who, if they did breed together, may have offspring that work, but there's going to be different barriers like temporal isolation. So temporal means time. So maybe one species is active in the morning, the other is active at night, and they never see each other to mate. Or a big one for fish is the time that they spawn in the stream. So like in Kentucky rivers, my husband looked at this for his master's. He looked at when different species of bass were coming up the river and breeding and laying eggs. And so what he found was none of them went down at the same time. None of them laid eggs at the same time. So it wouldn't be, most of the species wouldn't be able to breed together because they're releasing eggs at different times. And then next, habitat isolation. So in this case, they could be active at the same time, but they use different habitats. Like one bird only nests in a specific type of tree that's different from another bird. Or even in the same tree, but they use different parts of the tree. That's actually fairly common. And next, my favorite is behavioral isolation. We'll look at another slide on this. So a lot of species will have different behaviors that they do before they mate. Like lightning bugs will blink certain ways for mating purposes, or different mating dances. And if you don't know the right dance, you don't get to breed. And then mechanical isolation. So mechanically things don't fit together. So that can happen in flowers with pollen. There's a lot of diversity especially in the animal kingdom on this. There's so much penis diversity and they won't fit in each space. It's pretty cool. We'll look at that maybe a little bit later in another chapter. And then gametic isolation, even if they come together, the egg and the sperm can't reach each other in some way. A gamete is a sex cell, so like egg and sperm for us. Okay, so behavioral isolation, a couple examples, and I'm going to put links to videos where you can watch this if you're in my online class. This guy is a blue-footed booby, so that's a pretty good joke somebody came up with. They do this dance with their feet where they put one foot down and the other, and they do it in a very specific manner. If you don't do the right dance, you don't get to mate. And then this tiny little spider is a peacock spider. There's several species of peacock spiders. They're all really little, and they do these awesome dances where they like put their legs back like a ticking clock, and it's a really cool video. You should watch it. Another really fun one is western grebes. So grebes are, they're related to ducks, kind of. They're birds that are water birds. And western grebes, which we have in the U.S., they will like go on the lake and dance next to each other and do the same moves. And it's really cool. And if you don't know the right dance, you're not going to be successful. Ooh, fun one. I saw somebody dressed up as a peacock spider for Halloween online, and it was really cool. So if you're looking for a costume, that might be an awesome one. Okay, so now postzygotic barriers. These two separate species can have their egg and sperm come together to form a zygote, a single cell that's fertilized. And so there are two postzygotic barriers, hybrid inviability. So the zygote wouldn't develop properly, like it could be naturally aborted. Or hybrid sterility, like the mule that we saw, that individual can't have offspring. So it is like a dead end for the genetics. So how do we get two new species? You'll have one population that's interbreeding, and then something will separate them. One of those barriers or a physical barrier. We'll look at that. And over time, and okay, so you might be thinking, I don't think that can happen. This time, if it happens in less than 10,000 years, is pretty fast. Like, we'll see after those mass extinctions from the last chapter that you'll have this huge amount of speciation occurring, but it happens over like 10,000 years. So these niches were open and species diverge out when there's open spaces. So the two types of speciation are allopatric speciation and sympatric. So allopatric is, there's a separation, like a barrier between these two populations. So like these fish get separated, their ponds dry out in the middle, and then you have two different species interbreeding over time. A great example of that is the Grand Canyon. So like on each side you'll have different types of ground squirrels, which they can't interbreed anymore because there's a great giant canyon there, right? And then sympatric happens when they're in the same space. So that would be because of one of those prezygotic barriers, like maybe some start being more active earlier in the season, for example. Okay, so I briefly discussed the different levels of diversity in the last chapter, and the most inclusive was domains. So there are three: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, and these are being modified. This isn't the only way that they can be put together, but these are all small cells without a nucleus. Eukarya are everything that are larger cells with a nucleus. So you'll see animals, fungus, and plants. Slime mold sounds pretty fun. We're all in the same domain. And then I like to look a little bit at different adaptations for plants and animals as far as speciation goes. And in plant evolution, there's these 4 big adaptations that you see in different types of plants. So non-vascular plants are the most basic. And so vascular means like vessels. So in us, the cardiovascular system is our heart and our blood vessels, vascular vessels. In plants, the rest here are going to be vascular. So they're going to have this tube called the xylem, a tube called the phloem, where you're going to have food and water moving through the plant, through those areas. So bryophytes are non-vascular, they don't have any of that. So then, ferns are the next most complex. You've got vascular plants, and then they develop seeds. So gymnosperms, like evergreens, for example, these are naked seed plants. So like things like pine cones are their seeds. Whereas angiosperms are flowering plants. And so that's where you'll see like a fruit develop when they get pollinated. And once angiosperms started being present in the fossil record, you see them flourish and incredible diversity happens really quickly. If you were wanting to build a house, the gymnosperms would be the kind of trees you'd want to use. If you wanted a fruit tree or producing something you could eat, angiosperms would be your bet. Okay, next we've got the invertebrates versus vertebrates. So vertebrates are going to have a backbone. So you can see us getting more complex here. And as humans, we always make ourselves the most complex, so we always put ourselves at the end. So first, we have sponges. They don't have any true tissues. A tissue is a group of cells working together. So they just have cells. Then you see all the rest are going to have these groups of cells working together, these tissues. And you've got cnidarians like jellyfish, which are radial symmetry, so they're like circular. And then the rest are going to be more bilateral, where like they have a left and a right side. You can cut them down the middle. And you'll see flatworms like this planaria here. There are really cool sea marine flatworms that are beautiful. And then they branch out, and these four are all more closely related than flatworms. You've got roundworms, like nematodes. And if you watch the TED Talk from E.O. Wilson, he talks about how important nematodes are and how common they are. And then here, more closely related, you've got annelids, like earthworms, and arthropods. Arthropods are the most common by far because insects fall in here. And so, like, beetles are incredibly common. We'll look at slides on that later in another chapter. You've got spiders in there, the arachnids. You've got crabs, lobsters, horseshoe crabs. Very diverse phylum. Then you've got mollusks, like clams and snails. And then you can see over here, more closely related, echinoderms, echinodermata phylum, and chordates. That's where we're going to fall. So echinoderms include such species as the sea star, as the sea urchin, and sea cucumbers. Pretty fun. And then chordates will have the amphibians, reptiles, birds, and we'll look at these on the next slide. And this, we could spend a whole year on this. I'm going through this so fast, just to give you an idea of the different type of species of animals. Okay, so now let's start looking at our vertebrates. So here, we've got the ancestral chordate where everything branches off. 542, is that years ago about? So an amount of time that we can't even imagine. So before we get to vertebrates, we've got tunicates, which are marine. They're in the ocean. They are like sea squirts. And then you have the lancelets. So these are fish that don't have a backbone yet, that bury themselves halfway in the sand. Okay, so now we're getting to vertebrates, where they have a backbone. So first you got lampreys. So they're jawless, but they've got these big round mouth full of teeth, and they're parasites. They are in both marine and fresh water. Then you have the adaptation of jaws. So you've got cartilaginous fish. So like sharks Sharks are carnivores, and they're really cool. They have some really fun adaptations where they can monitor electrical energy and electrical output of their prey. And then lungs are lung derivatives. First you got the bony fish. So these are like your bluegills, the ones that have bones. Then we get to our tetrapods, the 4 legs. And so we have first amphibians. And okay, they have an awesome adaptation where they can live part of their life out of the water, but they still require it. So they have to do their first part of their life cycle in the water. Some never leave the water, but most do. So amphi means partial. So amphibians, part of their life on land, part on water. But the problem that they can't solve is they can't go without water, right? They dry out. Their eggs would dry out. So what you've got as the next adaptation is the amniotic egg. So reptiles lay eggs. And you might be surprised, but birds, aves, actually falls within reptiles. They say not all the dinosaurs when extinct became birds. There's some fun videos where they show how chickens can walk like dinosaurs. So now their eggs don't need to be in water, which is pretty awesome. And then you've got mammals, which have hair and mammary glands, and that's where we fall. And then you can look at different types of mammals, like we're placental mammals, where there are non-placental, like the echidna is a pretty cool species. They actually lay eggs, as do the platypus, which is an awesome species as well. And then the other option you get are marsupials, where their offspring are born really small and then it lives in a pouch, like a kangaroo. The only one we have here native to the U.S. is the possum. Be kind to your possums. They are good. And that is just the briefest highlight of plant and animal evolution and how things are related. Okay, so now let's look at discovery of new species. So about 300 species described every day. A lot of these are insects. A lot of scientists' job is to look at and find new species, especially beetles. We have names for over 1.3 million. If you're looking at the most up-to-date, it'll be a little bit higher. Like right now, it's about 1.9 million. And we don't know how many total there are, but people have done estimates. So here's a few new species that were discovered in the last few years. This is a Philippine crab, pretty darn cool. And that's a Japanese sea slug. And it's pretty beautiful. And if you look, there's always websites of the coolest species described this year or found this year. Okay, so how many species are there total? We will look at a few estimates. Okay. So you'll see a wide range of estimates for the number of species on Earth. Okay. Most things will describe it as about 6 to 10 million. If you look at this example of estimating beetles, because they're so common, this estimate gives you about 30 million possible. Some researchers from Indiana looked at bacteria, archaea, fungi, trees, birds, mammals, and they came up with an estimate, which is the highest I've seen, of 100 billion to 1 trillion species, including all the microbes on Earth. And we don't know exactly. So not all areas are created equal for the amount of species diversity we see. This is looking at vascular plants. You know what those are now. And you can see the closer to red it gets, the more species present. And you'll see that there's an area generally in the middle where you've got a lot of species diversity. So these would be called species diversity hotspots. And where if you wanted to do research and where you wanted to maintain biodiversity, these would be really important areas. Okay, so researchers will often go into the areas and start collecting data in like what's called like a rapid assessment program, where you'll go in, you'll spend a month there, you'll collect as many species as you can, take genetics from them, you'll even take some species back. This is my husband back when he was real fluffy with that beard. He did with the Chicago Field Museum a rapid biological inventory where they looked at bats and bat parasites. So they would have mist nets out at night and they would catch bats and take blood samples and take some bats back with them, which is pretty cool. And that way you know where you're at. Because if you don't know where you are, you don't know how things are changing, you don't know what you're losing. So it's important to monitor where you are. Okay, that's the end of this chapter. Have a lovely day.